Welcome to the Lady Landlords podcast, where we empower women to gain financial independence through real estate investing. I'm your host, Becky Nova, founder of Lady Landlords. If you're ready to buy, manage, and grow your real estate portfolio, then let's get started. Are you ready to get your first rental property? Well, that's exactly what Faith did since joining Lady Landlords, and she is here to share her story with you. So, Faith, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course, you were one of the OG Lady Landlords. I don't remember the exact month that you joined, but it had to have been within the first 3 or 4 months of the community.
Yes, for sure. I think it was maybe either right before I bought or right after I bought. I joined your group.
Yeah, I want to say it was right. It was somewhere around that exact time, because I remember us talking about, and one of the ways that we kind of got connected was some questions with your favorite tenant, which we will talk about in a little bit. But I always ask you about her whenever you and I chat.
Yeah.
So I have so I'm really happy that you were willing to come on the show and share your story. I think it's great because when we get to have these member spotlights, it really helps the other members of the group see what women are doing, see that this is completely practical, and really inspire them to be able to go out and reach their goals too. So I incredibly appreciate your time of coming on and your openness to being willing to share your story.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Good. So first question I want to ask you is just what drew you to real estate investing? You could have put money in stocks, you could put money in crypto. What made you say real estate investing it is for me?
Yeah, so a bit of background. I'm a big budget nerd. And so I watch a lot of content creators on YouTube where they talk about their budgets and just financial literacy in general. And a lot of the people I watch, they also talk about how they invest in real estate. And they kept throwing the word passive income, like making money while they sleep. And I'm just like, that was such a foreign concept to me because all I know is going to work, collecting your check and calling it a day. And so
Right.
I learned more and more about what they did as far as building their generational wealth and passive income. I started learning more about real estate and investing in the different ways you can invest in real estate. So it just grew from there.
Now, being the lady landlord that you are now, how do you feel about the term passive income when it comes to owning rental properties?
It's not all people say it is. They make it seem like you don't have to do anything. Like you don't ever have to work another day in your life. And I guess you can have it that way if you have property management. But in my
Right.
case, I manage everything by myself. And so it's not 100% passive, but I can say I have more days where I don't do anything than when I do have to do something.
Right.
So,
It's not complete mailbox money.
right.
So maybe a little false advertising with the word
Yeah,
passive income, but you probably work harder in your day job,
exactly. Exactly.
right? And that probably takes up a lot more time
Exactly.
than being a landlord, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think having a system put in place, which is what I learned from the Lady Landlord group for sure, having a system put in place takes a lot of stress off of me. And so, yeah, I definitely agree. You can make passive income. It's just not going to be 100% passive.
Right, right. Not with rentals. But I just like to get that out there and make sure that everybody knows what they're really getting themselves into and that it's
Right.
not just always mailbox money.
Right.
So now you're listening to kind of these other content creators about budgets and finances. When you decided that's it, this is for me, I want to buy a rental, what was the first thing you did?
So originally, when I was looking for homes, I was going to just buy a regular house. So originally, I was living with roommates. I was in a college area, just had graduated college, and I was living with three other roommates, three other girls with three
Mhm.
different personalities and cleaning stuff, all of that. And so I was just tired of it. And I was also on a low income. I was only making 35,000 back then. So my concern was I can't afford market rent and I don't want to live with roommates.
Right.
So my coworker was like, well, at this point in this area, you could find an affordable house and just live there. And then you could get roommates if you need one, or you just find something you can afford. And so as I continued learning, about real estate and house hacking and all of that, that's when I found the duplex and I felt that was the best option for me, especially with my finances. And then also getting into that passive income generational wealth side of things.
Gotcha. I appreciate you sharing what you made as a salary because I feel like so many people think you have to have tons of money, you have to be a high income earner to really be able to purchase real estate. And I'm happy that you were open to share that because that's just not always the case. Listen,
Right.
does money help? 100%. But
Right.
can it be done in other ways? Also 100%.
Yes.
So when you then decided that you were going to move forward with purchasing that property, and you decided you were going to go with that duplex, that idea of that house hacking, so that way it would support you a little bit better with what your rent would be, but also give you that asset. Did you have did you have money saved up in the bank at that
Yes. So because my expenses were so low living with roommates, I was working full time and I just saved majority of my checks. So yes, I did have savings to go towards that purchase.
time? Gotcha. So you had that amount of money for your down payment, you had money for your closing costs, and did you have a little bit of emergency fund as well at the time?
Yes, I did.
Gotcha. Okay. So when you then went, and once again, now you have the savings, but you did not have a high income, did you
Right.
have problems getting approved for a mortgage?
I didn't have problems because my credit was great. I did have a bit of savings. I also want to say I did have an inheritance from my mom had passed away, and so they sold her home, and I did have that in savings. But I knew
Gotcha.
that money wasn't really going to be touched. But because
Right.
of my income, I didn't qualify for a lot. I think back then I only qualified for 130, 140. Um,
Okay.
Not a ton, but workable, I guess you could say.
Workable. Plus also it depends on the market. And at the
Mhm.
time you were in Georgia, right?
Right.
So, and in Georgia, it's to my knowledge, once again, I'm not in the area, so
Affordable.
you'll have to speak, but there are some areas that are not affordable for that price, and are some areas that are, right?
Right. That's for sure.
Did you have to, in order to then find a place with that price point, did you have to like dramatically move far from where you were, or did you feel like had to like live in an area that maybe you would not have picked otherwise?
No, not at all. I stayed in the same small country town, and it was like 15 minutes from my job, so I didn't have to move around or anything. It's just my pickings. Because so what I actually did with my loan officer, I said, how much do I qualify based off my gross? How much do I qualify based off my take home pay? And I made that amount with my take home pay my budget because I knew at the end of the day I only made 35,000. If I couldn't pay the mortgage, that's it. No one was there to help me. And so I wanted to make sure I could afford it by myself. And so I looked for homes in that price range, which made it a bit harder because obviously going based off take home pay, the amount is lower. So
Right. So you were already exactly. But I have to give you kudos for that because I feel like when people hear from a bank, like, wow, I got approved for $250,000 or
mhm,
$400,000, that people are like, well, I guess I got to go find a $400,000 house. And it's like,
right,
no, that does not necessarily balance with what you can pay and what you feel comfortable paying and what you should be paying. We still
right.
have to make those decisions on what our budget would be like, all because somebody's willing to give us a loan does not mean we need to take it.
Yes, exactly, exactly. I tell people that actually with my job, I'm a loan specialist for the government, and I tell people that all the time. Don't max out your budget just because they give it to you. Sort of like a
Right.
credit card. Just because they give you a credit limit of 1,000 doesn't mean you go and buy $1,000 purchase. Like buy 200 and keep the rest on the card.
I will say younger Becky could have really used that advice there, Faith.
It also goes back to, again, I love budgeting, I love financial literacy, and I think a lot of people just don't know about certain
Right.
things. So they learn from their mistakes, whereas I learned
100%.
from other people's mistakes.
Good. I had
Yeah.
to learn from my own.
Yeah.
so, so you're in a much better situation. Kudos to you for being a smart cookie over there.
Thank you.
So you were able to go and now not only did you get approved, but then you looked at those numbers and said, what could you do and what made most sense for you, not what the bank said,
Right.
right? Then what did you do next?
So then I started looking for properties and I actually found a brand new construction, a townhome, and everything looked good. And then when they ran the numbers, the mortgage was just making me a bit uncomfortable because again, I'm
Mhm.
by myself and I just had my W-2 job. And so, yes, I had savings, but when I ran my budget based off of that mortgage payment, I want to be able to add more to the savings. And that's what made me nervous. So I ended up not going forward with that new construction home
Mhm.
and found the duplex that I was interested in. And that duplex had sat on the market for a year. It had a bad roof. It needed a new HVAC unit. And my realtor was like, "This is a fixer upper. You don't have the money for this. Let's look at something else." But I'm
Oh,
like, "It's a duplex." And so he didn't know anything about the loan product that I was interested in. He didn't understand, he didn't know anything about house hacking. Those are things that I just learned along the way. So I sort of was teaching him. But obviously, if I was to go back in time, I would have probably tried to find a realtor who was also an investor, or at least knew or worked with people who are investors too.
right. And that's a really good point. Realtors are in the business of selling houses. They're
Mhm.
not in the business of making investors. They're not in the business of analyzing deals for cash flow.
Right.
Yes, some of them 100% have that skill. But especially as then somebody starting out, I hear what you're saying is that it would have been helpful to have had a little bit more guidance from somebody that had worked with other investors before, that would be able to kind of help position you and speak to you as somebody that was purchasing a property for an investment rather than somebody that was buying a property as their forever home.
Right. And I think that's the another thing with the great thing about the Lady Landlords is that you have a network of people who've been there, done that. So for
Right.
people who are beginners like me, I leaned on the experience of other people because no one in my actual circle, like family or friends, were trying to do what I was trying to do. So, they
Right.
just like, "Oh, just go buy a starter home and keep it moving." But I'm like, "No, I want to do things different. I want a house hack." "Well, what is that?" You have to explain everything to them. And so that's why I think it's important just to have a network of people who are either where you're trying to go or can teach you things along the way.
100%. And you're right. Like sometimes like our friends are not always as they love us, but they don't always understand exactly the path of what we're actually doing.
Right.
And you're right. Like the typical path in life, right, is that whole idea you got to go to school, get a good education, get a job, work there until you retire. And within that, it's buy a house is a big milestone for people, but it's usually buy a single family, live on your own, pay mortgage payment to mortgage payment, and hope that, and live paycheck to paycheck, like most Americans do. Those of us in Lady Landlords, you yourself, Faith, me, we are women that are really saying there's got to be a better way. I
Right.
want to let's do something that's maybe against the grain,
Mhm.
but will be able to kind of give us a little bit of a better reward. So I'm glad that you kind of went out on that limb and didn't kind of listen to the namesayers of like, oh, just go buy a house, you live in it, and then just be yours.
Right.
So you really had to educate your realtor on what you were actually working
Realtor, coworkers,
on.
friends, family, everybody didn't understand my thought process. And at this point, I'm just like, that's okay. I'm here to, I guess, learn as I go and then teach others.
Right. 100%, which is why we're here on the podcast, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So you then said, even though your realtor was like, no, Faith, you got this roof, you got this HVAC system, you still said, nope, that's it. This is the house for me.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
All
That's
right. So, and then you closed on that property when?
July 15th, 2020.
July 15th, 2020. So you're even buying this in the middle of a pandemic.
Yes. And surprisingly, that didn't make me nervous. It was just like, at the end of the day, this is what I want to do. I ran the numbers as much as I could, and I just want to take that risk in a sense, and I did, and I don't regret it at all.
Good. So
Yeah.
now you bought your first duplex in
Yeah.
Georgia. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was it like that first month being a landlord?
It was a huge transition. So when I bought the property, both sides were rented out. One side, she had been there for 4 years at the time. And then the
Mhm,
other side, the tenant was there for 60 days. So when
mhm.
I went to go tour the place the first time, she had boxes and stuff in the living room still. So she claimed she was not aware that the house was up for sale. Even though it had been on
Right.
the market for a year, no one had told her. So when I sent her that letter letting her know, hey, according to my mortgage guidelines, I have to move in I have 60 days till I can move in or when I
Right.
can move in. I sent her that letter and she was very upset and, said, if the house burns down, she wouldn't care. She'll let it burn. I mean, she's just very upset.
I
And
remember that. Yeah.
yeah, and it put me in an uncomfortable situation because I felt like I was kicking a single mom and her daughter out on the streets, but at the same time, I have to do what I have to do and move into this home. And so eventually she calmed down. I
Mm,
did help her find apartments in the area, and she ended up getting one in the same apartment, just a different unit. And
mhm.
she moved out and I moved in. And so now I'm transitioning in. And as a landlord, I would say I really had to eventually learn how to set boundaries. And especially with my other tenant who's very sweet, but can be a bit invasive and nosy. And I had to, set clear boundaries with her, expectations, letting her know like we can have a friendly, rapport and relationship, but I am not your friend. This is a
Right.
landlord tenant relationship. So let's not get that confused.
Good. And it is an interesting balance when you are living on the property with somebody to
Mhm.
have that balance of, once again, like, I am your landlord, but I'm your neighbor. We share a wall, right? And you want to be friendly and personable, but you also have to remember that you are in a different position and that you are responsible for certain things being her landlord.
Right.
Now, question for the first tenant that you had mentioned that needed to vacate the property. Did she have a lease?
She did have a lease and she did not read her lease. And so that's the thing. It stated in there that it didn't state that the house was up for sale, but it said if the home was up for sale, they had to give her a notice. She claimed she never got a notice. Well, when I took over, I gave her a notice the day I closed. Actually, right before I closed,
I
I went to
remember.
the house, put it in her mailbox, and then I drove to the closing table. And so when she got home, she got the notice. And she believed that she was getting evicted. And I'm like, no, you're not. You should have read your lease. But unfortunately, she didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
But and once again, too, it also, and it's something that's out of your control because it really was the seller that
Mhm.
should have provided her with the notice that, hey, the house is up for sale, it's going to be sold on the state. So she would have had more time and been more aware if the seller had kind of done the right thing. Also,
Right.
we probably should not have rented it, at that point. But if it had been on the market for over a year, I can see what he was like, okay, I need some income coming in. He was
Right.
probably in a situation where he needed to, but also it doesn't sound like he had kind of put her in the best situation. So you
Right.
did what you could. And I remember talking to you back in July and August
Yeah.
2020, and you were very lucky that also the tenant agreed to move out
Mhm.
and did not make you go through the eviction process and drag that out for months, especially once again,
During
August
the
2020.
pandemic. And I was that I did get nervous about. Like, oh man, if she doesn't move out, I gotta evict. How does that work? I don't want to really learn. So
Right. And you just bought a house. You're trying to figure out how to make the HVAC work and where light switches are, right?
yes.
And now I remember actually talking to you, thinking about it now. I remember talking to you on the phone, standing on the porch of my house with like a beer in my hand, trying to like talk you off the ledge. Being like, it's gonna be okay, Faith. I now I remember that because it was during summer.
It had to
Um,
be before I closed because I remember you asked about an estoppel.
an
You
estoppel
asked me if I
certificate.
have that filled out or something. And I was like, no, I don't. So it had to be before I closed for sure.
Right. Right. Because I think it would have been in July of 2020 when you were still in the process and you were still like about to close and probably had the accepted offer. But that was when you joined the beginners group coaching sessions,
Yes.
right? So do you remember your experience within that cohort that we had back in July 2020?
I remember you discussed it was a PowerPoint session and you discussed like different options with financing and um I really just remember the financing. I just remember I took a lot of notes, but I can't specifics, but I do know it was very helpful. But I just remember taking a lot of notes at that time.
Right. And I actually love that because now, like 2 years later, it's been so cool to see what you and the other women in that cohort have really accomplished, right?
Yeah.
So now you got first property, right? So then that kind of happened and we got that all settled and you got into place and you were then there for the past little over a year and a half now.
Yes.
But what's happened since that first property?
So as of August 1st, 2022, I purchased a second property, another duplex, but this time in South Carolina.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it. Another duplex 2 years later.
2 years later. And I honestly thought I was going to stay in my duplex in Georgia for however many years. So to be able to have my second property, like it's such a joy, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so let's break this one down now.
Mhm.
So you wanted the second property. We totally understand that. But what made you then look in South Carolina rather than stay in the same neighborhood? And I know, once again, we talked about this earlier before the recording, that you're about a couple hours away from where you used to be. What made you pick a different state, pick a different neighborhood?
So originally I was living in Statesboro, Georgia, which is just, known for Georgia Southern University, big college town. Um, and sorry, big college town. And so it wasn't a lot of things to do there. And I wanted to transition from a smaller rural area to a bigger city. And so I actually want to live in Augusta, Georgia, which is a
Mhm.
pretty large city. But I put offers in for properties there, kept getting outbidded by investors, people paying for with cash. And so right next to Augusta, Georgia is North Augusta. Literally, you go through a bridge and you're North Augusta, which is in South Carolina,
Oh,
um, Aiken County. And so my realtor and I start looking in Aiken County, and that's where we found the property here. So that's how I pretty much transitioned from Georgia to South Carolina, just looking for properties in the area, couldn't find anything. So I transitioned to South Carolina.
and Augusta, isn't there a big university too in Georgia and Augusta?
It's a lot of things. It's a really big city. I think it's the
Okay.
second largest city in Georgia, right
Yeah.
after. But yeah,
Okay.
there's a military base. There's Amazon there. There's a big university, medical district, all these
Oh,
hospitals,
wow.
traveling nurses. So that's my selling point. Like, whoa, I can rent to different kind of people there, and then also be in a bigger city and be involved more in the community. And
Yeah.
the only thing was, I just kept getting outbidded by investors.
Right. Well, because it's the way you're describing it, I'm like, man, maybe I should look at Augusta, Georgia.
I
Like
think you
I,
like it.
it sounds like such like a great market that really kind of hits on a lot of pluses. But once again, then that means that there's also a lot of other investors, and markets really kind of changed over the past 2 years. So I love the fact that you said, hey, listen, instead of Augusta, I can just go right across the border, North Augusta. They're right there next to each other. So okay, so then we found, and then you ended up finding another duplex.
Yes. So that this house is an interesting story. So it was listed for 5 days, and I'm like, that's weird. In this market, everything gets taken off the market super quickly. But it was listed for 5 days, and I told my realtor, hey, if you could just drive out there, do a video tour with me, and then we can look at it. And she did, and she was like, this is
Yeah.
really nice. I think you should put in an offer, and then once it's accepted, drive up here because it'll be about a 2-hour commute. Drive up
Yeah.
here, come check it out. And so I did, and yeah, I fell in love with it at that point.
Aw, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So now you found that duplex, but what did you do for financing on this one? What type of loan did you use?
So I use FHA,
Right.
FHA home loan. So I had to put down 3.5%.
Gotcha. And the first property you had, was that an FHA as well?
That was the FHA as well, putting down 3.5%. And then I eventually refinanced that home into a conventional loan because I wasn't sure if I was going to buy another property in Statesboro. And I knew the requirements was that you couldn't have technically two FHA loans at the same time, unless you meet
Right.
certain qualifications.
Right. There's a possibility you could have, but it definitely made more sense that you were able then to refinance out of that first FHA loan, which then gives you the availability to use that again, right? One of the biggest misconceptions with an FHA loan is a lot of people think it's a first time home buyers, right?
Right.
That's usually what a lot of people think that F and H stand for, but it's actually not. So there is no advantage necessarily. There's very few opportunities that help first time home buyers, right? Then you're looking at more of like a NACA program
Right.
or or those types of federal programs. But really the difference is the loans either need to be an owner occupied, right? With an FHA loan does fall under, or your investment properties, which means you don't live there. So when you live there in an owner occupied property, that's when you can really take advantage of those lower down payments.
Right.
And you can do that time and time again. Usually
Right.
there are requirements. You have to live there for a year within that property before then you would qualify for another. But once again, you bought the first one in July 2020. So you had already satisfied your mortgage conditions. You would then refinance out of that FHA loan, right? FHA, federal housing is what the F and the H stand for instead of first time home buyers. And then that allowed you then to purchase another property and still only had to put down 3.5%.
Right. That's the way to go. I highly recommend it, especially if you're looking to house hack. And again, with FHA, you could go up to 4 units. And so if you buy a
Right.
quadplex, you could literally live there for free. And yeah, you have to live there for a year. But the way I look at it is that gives you a year to continue to save for your next
Right.
property.
Right. And that was actually how I got my quadplex. I used an FHA on a fourplex and had to put down 3.5%, which in New York was amazing.
Yes, I bet.
So that really made a difference. That really is something that makes it accessible. So when you, between the two properties, did you, since you were house hacking that first duplex, was that one of the ways that you were able to replenish your savings and come up with the next down payment?
Yes, and I also got a part-time job at a grocery store. And originally, I got the job to pay off my car. I had bought a car right after I purchased my home. I just was buying things willy-nilly. But I
But
had
good thing you did it after you closed on the
after,
house.
don't do it while you're in the process, do it after. But it was my
Yes.
first car note, and I personally don't like having debt other than mortgages. I really don't like having debt. And so I really made it a goal to pay off that car. My goal was a year, and I paid it off in 10 months.
Oh my
And so,
God.
yes. And so once I got the momentum, I was like, you know what? I want to also increase my savings rate so that I could buy another property. I don't know when because the market is crazy, but I'm going to try to save as much money as possible in the meantime. So with my regular savings and then for my W-2 job and then my part-time job was able to help me out with buying this property.
Now and then did you also roll any savings from house hacking from the first duplex? Did you also take some of that and put that into your savings? Because that lowered your cost of living, right?
Yes. So I didn't, I guess, think of it that way. Like, okay, instead of me paying whatever in a rent payment, let me put the difference. I just put as much, literally, I paid my bills. I had a little bit of money, and then that's it. Everything else just went to savings.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, that's, I think, sometimes another misnomer within house hacking. I get people that call me, especially those that invest in New York or Florida, higher cost of living areas, that say, oh, but I can't find a house hack that cash flows. And I
Mm,
said, well, listen, what are you paying in rent now? So I'm going to talk New York numbers here, right? Oh, I pay $2,000 in rent. Great. I
geez,
know. I know, Faith, for those that are listening on the podcast and not watching us YouTubes, that you probably felt that eye roll that Faith
yeah.
just had. But that's crazy reality, but it is.
That's a
So
one bedroom.
that's what I used to pay for a studio apartment. I used to
Wow.
pay for a studio where I could see my toilet and my stove from my bed. And I used to pay $2,000 a month. And that was back before I moved in with my husband. So like 2016. I can't imagine that studio is probably $2,500 right
Yeah.
now, at least. So no, I used to pay $2,000 for a studio, just
Wow.
saying. But so anyway, so let's just take 2000 because I was just picking a round number here. So if for those that are house hacking, once again, when you remember that you're analyzing your numbers, you have to make sure that when you think about that cash flow, if you're paying $2,000 in rent, but then you can house hack and that mortgage is paid by the other tenant, and then let's say you only have to then put $1,000 into it,
Right.
you're still saving $1,000. Is it cash flowing? Technically, no, but you're saving $1,000. To me, that is a cash flow, right? So especially here, once again, in the New York market, it's going to be a little more difficult to say I can live for free and I can make money.
Right.
That's not a deal, that's a steal. But to at least be able to say, hey, listen, now instead of paying $2,000 in rent, I can pay $1,000 in rent to my own mortgage. And then I'm really saving that extra $1,000. That's a great way to kind of help snowball that next down payment.
Right.
So once again, you have to take those numbers and apply it to your situation and your cost of living. But I want to make sure that those that are house hacking, remember that that's kind of the benefit. It might not pay you if you're living there, but if you could decrease your own cost of living, that increases your savings.
I remember now that you mentioned that in the beginner's course, I think you gave a website or an app where we were able to calculate our cash flow. And I remember I was in a negative, and it was okay because think about it. I'm
Right.
living there for pretty much free. I mean, pennies on the dollar. And so, like you said, it might not cash flow, but look at how much you're saving instead of paying rent.
Correct. You were probably, if you were negative $200, that means that you personally had to pay that $200 to live for $200. I'll take that any day of the week, right? As long as it's cheaper than what you're currently paying, that difference is really money in your pocket. That really kind of is cash flow. So that's the caveat to analyzing deals that are going to be owner occupied compared to just your investment properties.
Absolutely.
So, because I feel like a lot of people, they'll just kind of go and they'll be like, nope, it's in the negative. Nope, it's in the negative. And it's like, well, because you're not calculating rent from the second unit because you're going to be occupying it, right? So I'm glad we went back, and I'm glad you were able to look at that and then not have a heart attack that you were buying the wrong property. So,
Yes.
so now we got this place. So now you have another FHA loan in South Carolina. So in the other unit that is in your duplex in South Carolina, was that already occupied?
No, it's not occupied as of right now. One side was. So the side I'm actually living on was occupied, and
Okay.
that person moved out after I closed. Well, a little bit before I closed. My closing date got pushed back, but he did move out eventually.
Okay, and then you chose to take that side, not the other vacant side.
Yes, because this side that I'm living in is a 1-bed, 1-bath. The other side is a 2-bed, 1-bath. So I can get more rents on the other side.
Right.
And that side is more renovated than this side. As you can see, wood paneling and stuff.
Yep. Faith and I were also talking about that before we hit the record button here. She's got that lovely wood paneling. So we'll have to have her send us some before and after pictures if you decide to update it. But it looks like it's still in great condition, and that's really the most important part.
For sure.
But that then sounds like it was almost a blessing in disguise that that tenant moved out and you were able to move into the smaller unit,
right,
and rent out the larger, nicer unit for now. Then you can rehab the unit that you're in, and then once again, then decide, depending on what you choose to do next, then you'll have a newer, updated apartment that you can then rent out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I got to decide what I want to do. I don't know if I want to do another house hack deal or just buy another property as an investment. Of course, it'll be more, as a down payment, but I guess it'll just depend on my lifestyle at that time. Do I want to live right next to my tenant, or do I just want to, be on my own? I don't know yet.
Right. And when do you think you would start looking for another place?
Well, when I first bought my first property, I thought it was going to be maybe 5 years, but I might be able to buy a property every 2 years, if not sooner.
Right.
Every year my income is increasing with my W-2. And again, my savings rate, it continues to increase. So it might be, sooner than I would think, but hopefully.
Right. And now you find you're living in one unit, right?
Right.
But it's hopefully cheaper than what you'd be living in somebody else's property where you were just throwing money away as rent. But now you also have 3 cash flowing doors.
Yes.
Right. So hopefully that'll maybe speed up things.
It hasn't sunk in yet, but I have 4 units. That's crazy.
You do. I just want to say, if you are not watching Faith on YouTube right now, being able to see her smile talking about these 4 units is absolutely fantastic. So if you're listening on the podcast, make sure to go check us out on YouTube as well, because just being able to see the smile she has on her face, thinking about you have 4 units after 2 years.
Yes.
That's amazing, Faith.
Yes. And you're an inspiration too. Let's not downplay your success either. You're killing it. You and your husband are killing it.
Thank you. Well, I mean, same thing. Like we are in a very similar position to you, where we do our best to live as cheaply as possible. I save over 80% of my paycheck into savings, which is fantastic. And then I roll all the profits of one property into the next property. So that has been we've right now been averaging buying 1 multifamily in New York every single year.
Wow. That's
craziness. So right now, I mean, we just closed on another duplex ourselves. So now we're up to 12 units. And honestly, for me, and we've talked about this too before, Faith, our goals are not to own all the properties, right? To me,
we can get.
Right. The most amount of cash flow for the least amount of units.
Right.
So, personally, I feel like we see this in Lady Landlords every once in a while, where there's kind of this competition of oh, well, I have 12 doors. Well, I have 14 doors. Well, I have 20 doors. I will put it out on record now that I don't ever want to own I don't want to own 100 doors. I probably will never own more than 15 doors. I'm pretty much, that's probably where I'm going to cap out. And I'm at 12 now.
Right.
And, you know, we have to really look at what the cash flow is that's coming in and really, but how we want that to fit our lifestyle, you know?
Right.
So everybody has their own journey and their own story, and we all have kind of our own end goal, but no one will ever hear me talking about how I own my 100+ units because I want to go live on my beach.
Right. And you're still house hacking, correct?
I'm still house hacking. Yep.
Yeah.
And just like you two, my husband and I live in a 1-bedroom. The unit above us is this gorgeous renovated granite countertop, stainless steel appliances, 3-bedroom. It's actually a duplex in our duplex.
Okay.
And then my husband and I live in the 1-bedroom downstairs.
So you hear them stomping? Do you hear them?
No, no. It's crazy. And you hear people talk all the time about like not wanting to buy like older houses. That house is from the 1800s. You don't hear it. I had 3 college kids over my head for the past 3 years now. Heard them maybe twice.
Wow.
Great.
My house was built in 1952.
And do you hear everything?
I feel like I do. Yeah. Just like the stomping or whatever. But I just have to get used to, different kind of area.
When you rent the upstairs, make the tenants put down a area.
So mine is actually side by side. What's crazy is it's a duplex according to the tax assessor, but to the zoning, they see it as a single family. And so I purchased it as a single family with an ADU.
Oh, okay.
But it's 2 separate units.
But it's 2 separate units. As long as you're renting it legally, you're in a good spot.
Right.
Isn't it funny how the people collecting the taxes are like, no, it's 2 units?
Yes. Yes. So they could charge more or whatever. Yeah.
Yep. What do they always say? That like the things that you can't avoid in life are death and taxes.
Literally.
Yep. You learned that on the single family with an ADU. But no, Faith, that's fantastic. I'm so proud of you. You've got 4 units in 2 years. So I cannot wait to see what you do next. We're going to have you back on to talk about the next property and to see where you go. So really, you might still consider doing a house hack moving forward, right?
Yes, for sure. I just say, right now, I'm single. I don't have any kids. Like I don't have anything really holding me back. I don't have to get someone else's opinion. I could just move wherever and do whatever. And so I just might do another house hack and see where I go.
Right. It's a great way to build your portfolio to be able to then satisfy those conditions, then move into another multifamily and just kind of do that on repeat until some of your lifestyle changes or until you kind of want something a little bit different. But
and also not only that, but as time goes on, I'm learning more and more. And so I feel like every investment should get better because you just learn more as you go about different opportunities, different ways of getting that property, ways to increase cash flow. I didn't know all of that when I first bought my property. I just was winging it and learning as I go, right? And so now I'm a bit more experienced. And so, buying my 3rd one is not as scary as buying the 1st one.
Right. No, 100%. And like, that's what we should always be doing. To me, that's kind of one of the best benefits of Lady Landlords is that like, there's always that place to say, well, this is where I started. This is what I learned. What's next? What's next? What can I continue to do? And we should always be kind of going through, it's like personal development through real estate. We should always be kind of thinking about like, what can we do to kind of improve? What processes can we kind of refine? And then that way we can just do the next one even better than we did before.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Faith, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. It is so inspiring to see what you've done in such a short period of time.
Thank you again. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. Please, 4 doors in 2 years. How can I not have you on? Your story is amazing. And I'm sure so many women are going to be really inspired by what you've been able to accomplish. So I will make sure I'll let you know if there's any kind of questions down that we get about the episode. And Faith, just thank you so much for your time. And I can't wait to see what you do next.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. For our listeners out there, do make sure to hit that subscribe and like button wherever you are listening on your podcast, or if you're watching us on YouTube, so you do not miss the next episode of the Lady Landlords podcasts. We release new episodes every single Tuesday, and I hope to see you next week. Thanks so much and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're feeling stuck in your real estate journey, visit lady-landlords.com/roadmap to book a one-on-one workshop with me. I'll help you determine your next best strategy. Or you can subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive tips and offers. Invest with confidence. Become a lady landlord today.